There's been a big breakthrough in the truth behind Jesus Christ's existence. Today I'll be talking about holy relics, secret archives, and all kinds of crazy things the Vatican is hiding, including aliens. Secrets of the Vatican Part 1. Deep underneath the Vatican is a secret archive of files going back 1200 years. Inside this rare collection of documents are said to be certain texts related to unexplained phenomena, including alien encounters. The Vatican has had such a tough time with their secret archive that they changed its name. It used to be called the Vatican Secret Archive, but they changed it to the Vatican Apostolic Archive, all in an attempt to stop people from spreading conspiracy theories about the secrets they might be keeping. It's a little too late for that. The world already knows that the archive is a repository for thousands upon thousands of records, many of which the public are not privy to, even though the Vatican says they've opened the archives to the public. Wait a minute, the archives are open? They are indeed. When Pope Francis renamed the archives half a decade ago, he also made its documents officially no longer secret. You can comb through the files yourself, reading the trial manuscripts of Galileo in 1633. Or you can read the papal bull from 1493 written by Pope Alexander VI, who gave Spain more control over the New World and effectively divorced them from Portugal. Then there's the plea from Mary, Queen of Scots, just before her execution, begging Pope Sixtus V to spare her life. When the Pope didn't intervene, Mary was executed in 1587. If you get a chance, read the letter. It is chilling. Or how about the letter written by Henry VIII asking the Pope's permission for him to get an annulment from his wife Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry a different woman, Anne Boleyn. Henry's letter was signed by 85 clergymen, but that didn't stop the Pope from denying Henry's request. The Pope's denial motivated Henry to cut ties with Rome and start the Church of England, ushering in centuries of violence between Catholics and Protestants. The 53 miles of shelving inside the archives is supposedly all out in the open. Everything the Church has ever placed in the archive is available for anyone to look at. Like the oldest document in the whole place, a loose piece of parchment discussing a church donation in Venice from 809 AD. At least the Church claims everything is open to the public. But it's kind of like the CIA saying they've declassified all their documents and released all their information on UFOs. They say it, but can you believe it? Do you really think the Church wouldn't keep any secrets from you? A lot of information in the archives has been digitized, but getting to the good stuff has been a little tricky. Diana Walsh-Pasulka is a religious studies professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Diana said that the historical record is filled with supernatural events. But the people at the Vatican don't know where to look to find those records. Diana said it's all crammed in the Vatican's basement, stories about all kinds of crazy things stashed under untouched cobwebs. Diana also said the archivists at the Vatican are currently in a rush to digitize everything they have. But there are a lot of documents, so they prioritize what they think is important. Most of the things getting digitized don't involve tales of nuns spotting strange orbs in the sky during the Middle Ages. Gary Nolan from Stanford University said the Vatican archives are a potential treasure trove for information on UFOs. Nolan called it the oldest library system of paranormal knowledge still in existence. So where is that information? Specialists are always talking about the alien secrets in the Vatican, but I want to see them. Shroud of Turin. Huge breakthrough. Either scientists are lying, the Church is lying, or Jesus Christ has just been proven real. A cloth that was buried with Jesus 2,000 years ago has been confirmed legitimate. It came as a huge shock since previous researchers dated the cloth to centuries after Jesus was dead. The artifact I'm talking about is known as the Shroud of Turin. It's a shroud that you can read about in the Bible. The Bible says that when Jesus Christ was killed upon the cross, he was wrapped in a linen shroud before being placed in his tomb. Matthew chapter 27 verses 59 to 60 says, "Then Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a new linen cloth. He put Jesus' body in a new tomb that he had dug in a wall of rock. Then he closed the tomb by rolling a very large stone to cover the entrance. After he did this, he went away." That very same shroud appeared in Italy in the 14th century. It was given to the dean of a church in Lille, France by legendary French knight Geoffroy de Charny. There isn't much more information on its earliest origin other than that. Nobody knows where the French knight got the shroud from, nor where it spent the first 1300 years after Christ's death. Now I must introduce you to David Rolfe, a filmmaker and former atheist. David set out to make a documentary surrounding the Shroud of Turin. Instead of proving the artifact to be fake, what David found convinced him of the shroud's authenticity and inspired him to convert to Christianity. In his own words, David said, "I started off as an atheist and then became an agnostic. And now I'm a Christian because I cannot possibly understand anything else that could have produced that image." The image David's talking about is the one on the shroud of Jesus Christ's face, which was seared into the cloth when it was wrapped around him. Not just his face, but his whole body. The shroud is 14 feet long and features a faint but distinct image of Jesus Christ. It's downright shocking to see. If the shroud is indeed real, Jesus Christ stood 5 foot 6 inches tall. What do you think about Jesus being considered short by modern standards? He had slightly sunken eyes and long straight hair. The shroud also shows the wounds he suffered during his mistreatment and crucifixion. In the 1980s, researchers determined the shroud to be fake. They conducted scientific analysis on the fabric, dating it to the Middle Ages. They focused on a small corner of the shroud, which proved to be from around 1200 AD, making it 1200 years too old. However, recent scientific tests have shown that researchers in the 1980s may have made a mistake. The scientists had focused on a corner that may have been repaired due to extensive damage. More recent tests relied on X-ray techniques. Scientists at the Institute of Crystallography used X-ray scattering to look at the cellulose patterns of the fabric. They looked at sugar molecules to determine the exact age of the material. The data profile showed that the linen is from about 55 AD, right around the time Jesus Christ was killed. This is shocking information. The shroud has been proven scientifically to be 2,000 years old. This also isn't the only time the Shroud of Turin has been proved real. There have been over 170 peer-reviewed academic papers published about the fabric since the 1980s. Many of the papers conclude the artifact to be genuine. Even if it's genuine, did it really belong to Christ? Experts at the same facility that confirmed its date also confirmed something highly disturbing. They found evidence that blood splattered on the shroud came from a torture victim. They know the person was tortured because they identified substances like ferritin and creatinine in the blood, which is typically produced when somebody suffers force trauma. Perhaps it was the blood of Jesus, or maybe the shroud was wrapped around someone who was horrifically tortured. There's still no evidence for where it came from before the French knight found it in the 1350s. And now for number 10, but first it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to John Corrigan and Becca Love for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. The True Cross. Although there are enough fragments of what's known as the True Cross scattered across the world to build an ark, the one at the Vatican is special. It was gifted to the people of Rome by Emperor Justin II in the late 6th century. But where did Justin get it? Justin ruled the Eastern Roman Empire from 565 to 578 AD. He ruled alongside his wife, Empress Sophia. The cross he gifted the people of Rome is known as a crux gemata, or jeweled cross. It's adorned with beautiful gems covered in gold and gilt in silver. On the cross is a Latin inscription that reads, "For the wood with which human Christ was overcome by the enemy, Justin and his consort give Rome this wealth and decoration." I will admit, Justin's cross is impressive, but is it legit, or is this another one of those artifacts that the Vatican puts on full display without any kind of scientific confirmation? Did you know that according to church tradition, the true cross was made from 3 different types of wood: cedar, pine, and cypress? Tradition also holds that each tree that was used to build the true cross grew together in a single spot. The same trees were used to construct the temple in Jerusalem. And centuries later, the Second Temple in Jerusalem. The last thing the trees were used for was to build Christ's cross. The Catholic Church and the Holocaust. New information has been brought to light that makes the history of the Catholic Church and the Holocaust even more mysterious. If you don't already know, the Vatican has been accused of maintaining silence while Hitler carried out one of the worst atrocities in human history. The subject matter is controversial and sensitive. Pope Pius XII signed a treaty with Nazi Germany before he became the Pope. Then, when he was Pope, he didn't say a word while millions of Jews were deported to concentration camps and killed. Scholars over the last century have accused the Vatican of working with Hitler to reach his final solution, the extermination of the Jewish race. However, some recently found documents challenge the plausibility of that accusation. A list of names was found at Vatican City's Pontifical Biblical Institute. The names are of 3,200 Jews who were secretly sheltered from the Holocaust by Catholic convents and monasteries after the Nazis took over Rome in 1943. It looks like the Vatican was actively trying to save as many Jewish people as they could, at least in Rome. But if that's true, why did Pope Pius keep his mouth shut when he could have blown the whistle on what Hitler was doing? You can see why the subject is so controversial. Nobody can decide if the Pope was on Hitler's team or working secretly against the leader of the Nazis. This newly discovered documentation increases the confusion. The names of the Jewish people have been verified by the organizing body of Rome's Jewish community. The community worked closely with Israel's Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum, along with a pair of Catholic-affiliated universities. The people on the list had been deported from the Jewish ghetto in Rome. These ghettos were just like the ones in Germany and Poland. When the people on the list were deported, instead of crossing the Tiber River and being taken to a concentration camp where they would have surely died, they were hidden by Catholic religious institutions. These documents were compiled by Father Gossolino Barolo, who was an Italian Jesuit, in 1945. And while they seem benevolent at first glance, Jewish historian David Kurtzer has expressed his skepticism. According to David, Catholic institutions would often only shelter Jews who agreed to be baptized. They would save Jews from the Nazis, but only if they would convert to Catholicism. That isn't exactly a selfless act. What would Jesus think? The Pharaohs and the Ark of the Covenant. Finding the Ark of the Covenant could mean unleashing terrible evils onto the world. 1 Samuel chapter 6 verse 19 reads, "But God struck down some of the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the Ark of the Lord." The Ark is one of the holiest yet most frightening artifacts out there, but where exactly out there is it? Some say it's hidden under the Vatican. Some say it's buried underneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. According to the Bible, the Ark was built by Moses after he led the Israelites out of Egypt in the 13th century BC. At that point, the Israelites' relationship with their God was new. They worshipped a deity named Yahweh, and to be honest, were a little more than a fringe cult. The Ark, made from acacia wood, overlaid with gold and decorated with cherubim, was the first tangible connection between the Israelites and their God. They kept it in the tabernacle of Moses. Then, centuries later, when King Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem, the Israelites had somewhere to finally put the Ark. Everything was great until those dastardly Babylonians showed up in 597 BC. They came seeking war and destroyed the Jewish temple. The Ark was lost and has never been found. But there are some clues that can be found in ancient Egypt. Researcher Scott B. Nogle published an article in 2015 pointing out an unusual coincidence. The Ark of the Covenant looked a lot like a sacred bark. In the Bible, there is an explicit description of the Ark. We know exactly what it looked like. It was 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. It had a cover on it and was carried by wooden poles. The Ark was also covered in hammered gold foil. When Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in the Valley of the Kings, something almost identical was discovered. Archaeologists found a wooden box covered in hammered gold foil and carried by wooden poles. The Ark of the Covenant was mounted by cherubim, while Tutankhamun's mystery box was mounted by Anubis, the jackal god. Even the physical dimensions were nearly identical. No, this was not the Ark of the Covenant, but it was the same type of box. Throughout Egyptian history, these kinds of chests were extremely important in their religion. During festivals, gods would be placed on thrones inside golden shrines and then paraded above swarms of followers on poles. The ornate shrines would usually be flanked by winged sphinxes, just like the Bible's cherubim. Could there be a secret connection between ancient Egypt and the missing Ark of the Covenant? And could the Vatican be concealing that very secret? Number 7. The mummies under the church. If you want to see mummies, forget going to ancient Egypt. Head on over to the Dominican Church of the Holy Spirit in the heart of Vilnius, where mummies lay sleeping in a dark and dank cavern underneath the church's altar. They had the misfortune of being abused by both Napoleon and the Nazis. Vilnius is the capital city of Lithuania, right next to Russia. When Napoleon's army abandoned their invasion of Russia and fled into Vilnius, some of them hid inside this ancient church. They were so desperate for warmth that they stripped the coffins hidden under the altar for firewood. Then, during World War II, Nazi soldiers used the church as a bomb shelter. The end of the Nazi regime didn't mean the church was saved. When the Soviets took over the region, they converted the crypt into a museum of atheism. Now anthropologists are trying to preserve the holy mummies and learn more about them. Dario Piombino Mascali completed an analysis of the 23 mummified inhabitants of the church. Some were men, others were women, and a few were children. They died as long ago as the 16th century and became naturally mummified thanks to the cold temperature in the crypt. The mummies still have most of their skin. Their organs are neatly jammed in their torsos. Some are even still wearing clothes. The first DNA sample Dario took came from the legs of a mummified child who died around 1643. He died from smallpox. Did you know that smallpox likely emerged around the time of the Pharaohs in ancient Egypt? Scientists are still struggling to understand where smallpox came from. It's killed more than 500 million people worldwide. What researchers found in these mummies is frightening. They traced the smallpox in the child's DNA back to a mystery strain that appeared from thin air in 1530. Scientists think the strain may have jumped from animals to humans. They think there could still be a strain of smallpox in animals waiting to jump to humans. If that happens, it could cause the worst pandemic of the modern era. Even the Soviets were afraid of what diseases these skeletons might carry. In the 1960s, Russian forensic scientist Joseph Albinas Markelis said there were more than 200 mummies in the crypt. But because authorities were worried about potential illnesses leaking off them, most were tossed into a pit. Then the pit was sealed with a sheet of glass. They called it the Chamber of Death. And in case you were wondering, yes, there are mummies at the Vatican too. The Vatican's mummy scandal. A scandal broke out at the Vatican when their ancient mummies turned out to be fakes. Researchers at the Vatican museums in Rome busted the case wide open, embarrassing the Vatican in a big way. But wait, why does the Vatican even have mummies? Because it's the Vatican. They have a monster collection of Egyptian artifacts. There's a whole selection of the Vatican dedicated to Egyptian history. In 2015, when researchers were studying 9 of the Vatican's full-bodied mummies, they found some discrepancies. 2 of the mummies weren't even remotely ancient. They were created in the 1800s during the hysteria of mummy mania. These were very small mummies, each one less than 2 feet long. Researchers at the Vatican had assumed they were the remains of either children or falcons. I feel like it should be easy to tell a child apart from a falcon, even wrapped in mummy bandages. But apparently it's harder than you think. A series of X-rays and CT scans sorted everything out. The bones inside the wrappings were from a man and a woman who date to the Middle Ages. Scientists also found a nail inside the wrappings from the 19th century. The mummies weren't children or falcons, they were random jumbles of bones stuffed into mummy wrappings. In fact, the only part of the mummies from ancient Egypt were the wrappings. But why would anyone go through the trouble of gift-wrapping modern bones inside ancient bandages? That's a story I think you're going to find very interesting. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte went on an expedition to Egypt. The next year, the Rosetta Stone was discovered. This kicked off an obsession with Egyptian antiquities, the likes of which have never been seen again. Wealthy populations in Europe and the US were desperate to get their hands on mummies and trinkets. In 1833, a monk wrote, "It would be hardly respectable upon one's return from Egypt to present oneself without a mummy in one hand and a crocodile in another." So many mummies were purchased that merchants started to run out. Faking mummies became big business. At some point, the Vatican ended up adding 2 fakes to their own extensive collection. Secrets of the Vatican, Part 2. I'm not done digging into the secret alien files of the Vatican just yet. I want to talk about David Grush, former US intelligence officer who recently claimed the US had been retrieving crashed UFOs for decades. David said the very first UFO recovered by the US was in Italy with help from the Pope. David has been blowing up social media over the past year. When he came forward with his claims of aliens at the Vatican, nobody knew what to believe. People still don't know what to believe. David did work for the National Reconnaissance Office and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He was a functioning member of the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, which was set up by the government specifically to investigate UFOs. If there's somebody who we should all believe about aliens, it's David Grush. According to David, right before World War II, an alien ship crashed in Magenta, Italy, but then Italian dictator Benito Mussolini got a hold of it. Mussolini kept the UFO until World War II ended. Then, when the coast was clear, Pope Pius XII told the Americans of its location, and they went in to retrieve it. The Americans brought it back home for further analysis, but what became of it is another story. Even though David claims to have accessed classified documents and spoken to eyewitnesses, he hasn't been able to give any specific details on the alien technology or exactly how America is using it. But it makes you wonder, if America has a collection of crashed UFOs, shouldn't other countries have some too? Could this be a global conspiracy? Maria the Mystic. Maria Simmer was an Austrian mystic who had visits from souls in purgatory. She is one of the strangest stories of all the obscure mystics in the Catholic Church. Maria was born in 1915 and had 7 brothers and sisters. Everyone in her family was a poor peasant. They ate what they could, and that sometimes meant eating nothing but their faith in God. By the age of 7, Maria started to feel a strong calling to the Lord. By the age of 17, Maria had entered the Sacred Heart of Jesus Covenant in Tyrol, but due to an illness that had wreaked havoc on her health for years, she was obligated to leave. The Mother Superior said that she was too weak and sick to be of any use at the convent. This happened again with the Dominicans and the Franciscans. Maria kept trying to get into a convent, but was told repeatedly that she was too sick. At the age of 25, she had her first visit from a departed soul. One night, Maria saw a man in her room pacing at the foot of her bed. She shouted at him, but he did not acknowledge her. When Maria got out of bed, she grabbed at the man, but he disappeared at her touch. When Maria got back into bed, the mysterious stranger returned. She could do nothing but watch as he paced silently and then later vanished again. When Maria talked to her parish priest about what she witnessed, the priest suggested that it was a ghost from purgatory and that perhaps he needed help with something. The ghost returned to Maria's bed the next night and she asked what he needed. The spirit said that he needed 3 holy masses said in his name so that he might be delivered from limbo. This became Maria's life. Over the next few years, she was repeatedly visited by souls in purgatory who asked for prayers and sacrifices. The spirits complained that their family members forgot them and that they couldn't be freed from their endless prison without somebody's help. Maria was never made into a saint by the church. She lived her whole life poor in a small chalet in Sonntag, Austria. She died on March 16, 2004. The church has remained strangely silent about Maria. They don't seem willing to confirm her relationship with the souls of the dead. The Vatican has a long history of embracing miracles, but shunning those they consider mystics. Do you think Maria truly saw souls stuck in purgatory? The Christmas secret the church doesn't want you to know. I know it's a little early, but I'd like to talk about Christmas. Or rather, I'd like to discuss the origin of Christmas. Because although most people associate Christmas with the birth of Christ, what they don't realize is that the Church is hiding something. The Vatican doesn't want you to know that Christmas originated with a much more ancient god from Babylon. His name is Tammuz, and he may have been the original template for Jesus Christ. Christmas Day coincides with the winter solstice. It's when the days become longer and the sun rises a little higher in the northern hemisphere. 2,500 years ago in Babylon, the return of the sun was celebrated as the reincarnation of the god Tammuz. In Babylon, the head honcho of the gods was Nimrod, and his wife was Semiramis. After Nimrod's death, Semiramis became supernaturally pregnant. Just like the Virgin Mary, Semiramis was impregnated by magic. She gave birth to Tammuz on December 25th, Christmas Day, the same day Jesus Christ was born. Jesus was the Son of God, and so was Tammuz in a way. Only the Babylonian story gets a little disturbing. Semiramis believed her son was a reincarnation of her husband, Nimrod, so she married him. Semiramis did have good reason for believing Tammuz to be a reincarnation of her dead husband. On the night of his birth, an evergreen tree grew from a dead tree stump, symbolizing the birth of new life. This story is the reason you get to open presents underneath the Christmas tree every year. It became an annual tradition in Babylon to celebrate the birth of Tammuz by gathering around a great evergreen tree and exchanging gifts. The Babylonians would go out into the woods, cut down an evergreen, decorate it, and then place gifts underneath it. The Vatican will never admit how much of their precious customs and traditions were based on ancient pagan rituals. This bathtub is worth $2 billion. The Vatican is home to some of history's greatest treasures, like Emperor Nero's bathtub from 2,000 years ago. The bathtub is made from rare Egyptian marble called imperial porphyry. If it were to be recreated today, it could cost anywhere from $1 to $2 billion. Every last scrap of this marble came from a single quarry in a remote part of Roman Egypt, discovered in 18 BC. The Romans mined all the marble they could until they lost control of Egypt 600 years later. The Vatican is even home to portraits of the most famous athletes of the year 217 AD. The mosaics of the athletes were taken from the great baths of Caracalla. These were the best of the best, the real Olympians during the peak of Rome. The baths of Caracalla were commissioned by Septimius Severus in 206 AD. They were considered one of the most luxurious baths in the ancient world. The design allowed for 1,600 bathers at the same time. If you think your public pool is crowded today, you would have been mortified by all these Roman bathers. St. Peter's Basilica is home to Michelangelo's Pieta, and let's not forget about the Vatican Codex, considered one of the oldest complete Bibles in existence. It dates to roughly 325 AD, but it's not an original since it's written in Greek. The original Bible was probably written in either Hebrew or Aramaic. Still, the Vatican Codex is one of the earliest versions of the Bible that survives today, the Gospel of Satan. One of the most frightening things said to be held in the Vatican is a book of immeasurable power known as the Gospel of Satan. There are so many rumors surrounding this tome that scholars aren't sure what's true and what's fiction. Nobody has ever seen the book, but apparently it was discovered in Jerusalem in 1750. The Gospel of Satan was found in the tomb of Solomon, or so they say. In reality, scholars think the book was likely written by somebody in the 18th century. There are different editions of the book that date to 1421, 1521, 1702. It's all very confusing, especially since none of those early editions are around. You can read the Gospel of Satan right now, but it's going to be a contemporary version written by 19th century occultist Eliphas Levi. The edition from 1421 is nowhere to be found. These earlier versions are said to be the ones in the Vatican, as the Church has supposedly been rounding them up. In the contemporary edition of the Gospel of Satan, also called the Grand Grimoire or the Red Dragon, there is an introductory chapter. The introduction states that the material in the grimoire was derived from two very old and very powerful books, Key of Solomon and Lesser Key of Solomon. Both these books were supposedly written by King Solomon himself upwards of 3,000 years ago. King Solomon from the Bible. The old tomes are filled with spells, summoning instructions, and all manner of divination. The Gospel of Satan is all about the devil. The book contains instructions on how to summon a demon and bind it so that it will do your bidding. There's also an instruction manual for making a deal with Satan, presumably at the cost of your own soul. The demons that you can summon in the book include Lucifer, naturally, but also other mighty demons like Beelzebub and Astaroth. Or if you don't feel like you can handle the big guys, you can summon one of the lesser demons such as Nibiros, Flirty, or Satanakia. Which demon would you summon if you could figure out how to master the spells in the Gospel of Satan? Let me know in the comments, and thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and come back soon for more awesome videos from the channel.